Good morning, everyone. Just going to give it another minute or so as see people are still joining. So we are recording the session and we can share a copy of the recording afterwards alongside all the slides that we're going to go through this morning. We've had some questions submitted already via participants, but please do feel free to ask more within the Q&A function as we go through the presentation over the next hour. I'm going to give it 20 more seconds and then we can kick off. Right, everyone, good morning and welcome to the third in our webinar series on GS1 powered QR codes. Today we're going to talk a bit more around some of the legislative challenges that GS1 powered QR codes can help solve, particularly for those businesses and brands that are trading cross borders within many different territories and countries. Next slide, please, Phil. So a summary of what we're going to discuss today. We're going to do a short recap on GS1 powered QR codes, explaining what these are, how they work, why they're important. We're then going to move on to talk about challenges in legislation and cross-border trading. We're going to have an overview of what members are currently doing using GS1 powered QR codes to overcome these challenges. And then Nikki's going to give a summary of a pilot program that we're running across our member base that you can sign up to and can be part of to kick this off today. And finally, we'll end on a Q&A session. Next slide, please, Phil. So everyone's probably wondering what are GS1 powered QR codes? Why are they different from current QR codes? Next slide, please. And it's exactly this. So the current barcode has existed on product packaging for the last 50 years. The reason that barcode is on your products today is for two simple reasons. Firstly, it allows you to identify that product as it moves through supply chains, allows sellers and retailers and yourselves to know how many of that product is in stock, how it's sold, where it's sold, etc. And secondly, it allows it to go beep at the checkout, and everyone is probably more than familiar with that within the world of UK retail. What we're doing today, however, is we're combining two of the greatest inventions of all time. So the barcode that already exists on your product's packaging and the internet. And what this does is it moves that barcode away from just being something that works really well for supply chains into something that now works for consumers. And the opportunities around this is being able to essentially turn every one of your products into its own media channel. So consumers can scan it and they can find out lots more based on the information you want to share. Why this is so important around regulation and legislation is currently a lot of that information is directed at consumers and needs to sit on product packaging. Now, the issue around this is there's a lot of legislation across a lot of different territories, and we know that more legislation is being added and there is a finite amount of room on product packaging today. Next slide, please, Phil. So as I mentioned, we are working globally around GS1 powered QR codes across the whole spectrum of retail. So within supply chains, we're speaking to all our retailers about what this looks like and the potential for these barcodes to go beep at the checkout at point of sale. There's lots of value in that for retailers, such as preventing the sale of out-of-date stock, and helping speed up product recall. But most excitingly, we're working with brands and manufacturers around the post-purchase opportunities for them to talk directly to their consumers and fulfill the legislative obligations around on-pack labelling. Next slide, please, Phil. So as I said, this is a global initiative. We kicked this off in the UK market about 12 months ago. We spoke to many of our members across the top grocers, the top brands, medium-sized enterprises, all the way down to SMEs. And these are the key areas or the key challenges that businesses are facing today. And they're key asks from us in terms of how GS1 powered QR codes can help them transform their operations. So businesses see this as a huge opportunity to drive revenue through connecting to consumers, enriching customer engagement, collecting first-party data that can transform digital strategy. They see this as being the next step within digital, certainly from a marketing and engagement opportunity, but then there is a huge opportunity around the sustainability space. So how do brands and manufacturers talk to consumers about buying the products, consuming them in a way that's sustainable, disposing them and storing them in a way that's sustainable, and fulfilling other legislative sustainability challenges as they begin to trade cross borders within the UK and beyond. Next slide, please, Phil. So in terms of what this looks like from a consumer experience perspective, imagine this. You've got a QR code on product packaging. Now, what makes this a GS1 powered QR code is it has that number that sits under the barcode today, the number that individually identifies every product. It has that number embedded within the QR code. So like I said, it's combining two of the greatest inventions of all times, the internet, because it is a QR code, but also the GS1 barcode for individual product identification. So when consumers scan this, they see information that is specific at SKU level, at product level, and that's absolutely essential for meeting legislative requirements, because as we all know, the information on pack differs depending on product at product level. So things like nutritionals being a really good example of this. But then when we think further down the line in terms of you know, the legislation that government in the UK is now looking at putting on pack around enhanced nutritionals, eco-labelling, carbon call-out, this will be very important that it is identified at individual product level, particularly as well when we think about how that product is recycled, what the components of that product's packaging are. So consumer scans it, they're then taken to a location where they can click into further information about that product. As you can see here, there's lots of opportunities for brands to give all sorts of information that may drive revenue, that may help engage customers, that may tick off some of their KPIs, but there is a huge opportunity as well to make sure that consumers can access the legislative information required in their language, in their territory. Next slide, please, Phil. So one of the challenges that we're facing into, certainly within the UK market, is the abundance of information just needed around some of the sustainability labelling. Now, at GS1 UK, we do a lot of work with industry and government on deposit return schemes, kicking off across all 4 nations in 2025. And one of the biggest challenges is that there isn't just one deposit return scheme that covers UK and the rest of the world, or even the rest of Europe. There's different logos needed for different deposit return schemes across territories that we find a lot of our members trading the same product within. On top of that, there are other sustainability logos needed on packaging. Here's an example of some of them mocked up here. And the challenge that we're hearing from our members is, you know, firstly, we can't fit it all on pack. Secondly, some of this information is actually conflicting based on the icons and the imagery and what's on there. And thirdly, brands are now facing into the challenge of, okay, we need different SKUs for different territories, which, as everyone knows, introduces cost and complexity and additional range into supply chains, ultimately generally leading to more wastage and higher prices that are passed on to consumers. So some of the examples that we'll go through later on is how industry are already beginning to use QR codes to communicate this information to consumers. So imagine QR code, consumer scans it, and they see only the sustainability or regulatory information that is applicable to them in their language, in their territory. So a much better consumer experience and less room for any sort of error in terms of how you recycle a product or what deposit return scheme it might be part of if it's an in-scope item. Next slide, please, Phil. So, as I mentioned, within GS1 UK, we've been exploring this very heavily for the last year. Here are some examples of partners that we're working with within this space and real live implementation that we have seen from industry. As I said, we have a GS1 UK solution within the space where we are looking to industry and invite industry to come and work with us in moving this forward together and having a go at implementing this on their products today, which you will hear a bit more about. If you look on our website, you will see there are a number of other partners playing within this space, all with, I guess, slightly different sort of user experiences. So we do invite everyone to have a look on our website and see what options are available. Next slide, please, Phil. And I will hand over to Monica.
Thank you, Kerry. And my name is Monica. I am the head of marketplaces. And so regulation is really important to our members as they trade cross-border using platforms like Amazon and eBay. So I'm going to try and distill some of the challenges and some of the current legislation that our members are facing. So regulation is a hot topic at the moment. I'm sure you all agree, whether it's been new technologies being adopted into the market like AI, or ensuring resources are being responsibly sourced or used for longer. There is an urgency behind all of the regulation that's coming out. And according to the recent IPCC report, we actually have less time and we need to act faster. So at a very high level, what does regulation actually look at? And there are three things. The first is consumers, to make sure that products are safe. So ensuring consumers are able to make informed decisions or better decisions about the products they consume and what they need to do with the product post-purchase, whether that be recycling, repairing, or repurposing. That is the focus that regulation has in mind for when they think about consumers. And then there's manufacturers. That's the second thing that regulation looks at. And at the moment, the regulations are focused on making sure manufacturers are thinking about the eco-design. How are products designed for circularity, extending the value of that product throughout its life cycle, and being really responsible about the resources and the components, and being very sure that they understand where these components are coming from and remaining transparent across their supply chains. And the final thing is regulation looks at market surveillance. And it's in these authorities' interest that the information is accessible so that they can evaluate products and make sure that all these products that are in the market are actually meeting requirements. So recently, speaking to some consultants, some sustainability consultants around packaging and labeling, I became aware of how many regulations, and there was a mention of 260 packaging and marketing labeling requirements, which seems a lot for any one brand to be mindful of and looking at. So it's really important to understand also that regulation promotes interoperability and adopting a harmonized approach. Which is at the heart of regulation, but also at the heart of our GS1 standards. And really, this is to benefit industry and consumers alike. Interoperability and harmonization is what makes our standards unique. Our standards start with unique product identification, as Kerry said, using your GS1 product identifier, which is the number assigned under the product barcode, which is usually referred to as either a GTIN, a EAN, or a UPC. And using the identifiers alongside some of our other standards, which is how do I capture that information relevant to that product, and how do I share that in a harmonized, interoperable way. Next slide, please. I found this quote on the internet while I was doing my research, and this quote was taken from a packaging design platform. They started out helping brands and supporting them to advance the packaging design across their industries and all sorts of formats. And the quote was uploaded in 2017. And then the following year, they actually became a creative platform for packaging designers, brand designers, consumer brands, agencies, suppliers, just anyone who was looking at packaging and labeling. And I'm sure you'll agree with the quote that shows that actually they had to rethink how they were going to do packaging and labeling to deliver all the requirements. And hence why they created this community, so they can really think about it and innovate. But it's also interesting to note that even in the quote at the time, they weren't really thinking about the digital possibilities, and perhaps adding more booklets was the next way to do, it was to serve up some more of that information. Next slide. So what is our current situation? Let's just take stock for a moment. Labels have always been restricted to the size of the product. And as you can see from this image, that is actually a label from a laundry detergent. And the more regulation that comes through, the more that label needs to work harder. And you can imagine that for you and me, reading that kind of information is really inaccessible. With EPR and other packaging regulations, reducing carbon footprint and designing products for circularity is really essential. So we're going to see that label really struggle to deliver what it needs to in terms of its carbon footprint and its circularity. But the other thing that's really important is to imagine that that label needs to do more across more territories once you start to trade cross-border. And in the EU alone, there's 47 different countries with different icons and waste disposal systems with different color bins. So that is really quite complex. And for a label to deliver that on the back of pack is nigh on impossible. Next slide. So here, for example, are different types of products and different sizes. And really, this is just to emphasize the point of limited labeling capabilities. These are both very highly regulated product categories. And we're seeing smaller products with limited packaging often exempted from having to provide all the information on the back of pack. And you'll see from implementations across the EU, a lot of the data on the smaller products are actually starting to be delivered digitally. And on the right-hand side, believe it or not, the bigger bottle actually only delivers 83 washes, whilst the smaller one 85. And both of them are pressured to deliver sustainability, safety, and compliance regulations. Obviously, the larger product has more space for bigger labels with more information, but the smaller compact products, product packaging is obviously really limited. Next slide. So just what's going on in Europe at the moment, and what have we seen already released into the market? So in France last year, September, Article 17 came into full force. And that is where every product needs to carry on its packaging the Trimend logo and sorting, which is really just sorting instructions for the product and the packaging. And it is dependent on size. Earlier this year in January, France released another requirement, which was Article 13. And here you have to disclose all of the components of your products so that people know what to do, the lid, the bottle, the packaging, how to dispose of those. And then at the same time, Italy also enforced its recycling requirements. Interestingly, though, they went digital. And so you could either decide to put it on pack or deliver that digitally. For France, the Tri-Man was on pack. It depended on the size of product. Smaller products were exempt, but it had to be on the product packaging. And if you've kept abreast of the news, they are now working through a court case presented by the EU for increasing barriers to trade, because putting that Tri-Man logo has prevented a lot of people from, or a lot of products from making it through the border. So again, it's how easy can legislation and regulation make it for people to meet these requirements without creating barriers. And then later on this year, there is a wine regulation, and every bottle sold and consumed in the EU will need a QR code in order to disclose ingredients, allergens, and nutrition. Next slide. So what does that look like? So on the top left-hand corner, that is the Tri-Man logo, helps people understand how to recycle. The Italian logo is the color bins. This Article 13 for France is disclosing all of the components, all the content, recycled content in your product. And then, of course, the EU-wide wine regulation is a QR code that's required. Next slide, please. So what's going on in the UK? So regulations were first launched in 1997, believe it or not, across Britain. And these became the producer responsibility obligations in 2007. And the latest version is still in place today. But the regulations work on the principle of collective responsibility. And all businesses that produce or use packaging should contribute towards the cost of recycling and recovery. So any business using packaging, and that's the producer, will take responsibility for the environmental impact. And so we're seeing a timeline of when what needs to be implemented. Of course, it was launched this year and people needed to register. The first payment will be due, and that is disclosing how much product you're going to be putting into the market. And it also depends on the size of business that you are, whether you opt in or opted out. But it gets stronger, and more the information that is required to understand compliance becomes deeper. So we'll see the introduction of modularization fees. This is where there's going to be more scrutiny on the type of recycling materials that you're using. So the more difficult it is to recycle, or if you're using not recycled or unrecyclable packaging, you must probably, as a producer, see higher costs associated with complying with the EPR. Next slide, please. So with the help of one of our partners, Biodoc, we could imagine what labeling evolution would look like. So it's interesting to see this mock-up. How will product packaging change and labeling change? And how can GS1 powered QR codes really come to the fore? Currently, GS1 powered QR codes can enable regulation, but we need to see regulation enable these QR codes to meet the requirements. So perhaps over time, we'll see more content behind the GS1 powered QR codes and less on the product packaging. Next slide, please. But there is still a real challenge. Currently, businesses need to meet local legislation and international regulation in order to trade cross-border. And often smaller, but also we're seeing a lot of the larger businesses are being caught out and need to react to different requirements. Having consultants and experts at hand can be costly and out of reach for a lot of the smaller businesses. So trading on platforms like Amazon and eBay, they do provide help pages, and oftentimes these can be quite generic and high level, but really helpful for creating awareness and signposting to services and experts. And as Kerry mentioned, at GS1, we also signpost to experts and services, and she mentioned two of those in Biodoc and Polytag. Biodoc is focused more on meeting legislative requirements, and Polytag is focused on circularity and waste. So as mentioned, the problem for brands is awareness and taking action. But what about your distributors and those retailing your products into the market? They often don't have control over the product design and the packaging. And so they might have to do something different. They might have to create stickers and overlay those on your products so that they can change to sell those products across markets. So that becomes quite difficult for the distributors in the market. Next slide. So this slide is just an example of some of the information that Amazon provides its sellers. So links to blogs, to services, to consultants, and to solutions that can help sellers overcome and meet the requirements. Next slide, please. So as we said, GS1 powered QR codes is the enabler to meeting packaging and labeling requirements as reported by our members. And as part of your GS1 membership, you already have your identifier and you have access to training and expertise on how to capture and share data using our standards. So this is the good news. And as Kerry mentioned, we've had conversation with our members and they've reported back three major benefits: cost savings, sustainability, and legislation. And in cost saving, a lot of them under a lot of pressure to reduce their costs. So becoming more productive with the resources they have. In our language, it would be making the barcode work harder. Saving on packaging and redesigning of labels, that can be really costly as well, certainly as regulation changes at the pace that it is. Reducing carbon footprint when sometimes you need to maybe recall your products from borders or territories where they're no longer compliant. And again, of course, reducing the size of your packaging so that it meets your sustainable goals. And in sustainability, it's obviously meeting the requirements of the EPR, as Kerry mentioned, our local deposit return schemes and other recycling requirements, but also showcasing some of the certificates and the climate-friendly credentials that products have. Those can be very difficult and quite cumbersome, and as more and more of them become important to show consumers. And then the last one would be legislation. So meeting legislation across borders. So being able to actually trade in countries first and foremost, being able to change the information on your packaging in real time, and being able to do that through your dynamic data anytime is pretty powerful. So this is the benefits identified by our members. Next slide. And I'll hand over to Sophie. Thank you.
Hi there. So yeah, I'm Sophie Fuller and I am part of the retail team at GS1 UK. I'm going to try and just bring this to life a bit for you with a couple of examples from a couple of our members who have been utilising GS1 powered QR codes for cross-border trading. Next slide. So the first example I've got is from AII Beauty. If you go on to the next slide. AII Beauty are they're headquartered in Los Angeles. They're not actually UK based. They're based over in Los Angeles. They're the largest family-owned beauty organization in the US. These are just a few examples of some of their brands. Personally, I hadn't heard of AII Beauty as an organization. However, I recognize a lot of those brands that are on the screen in front of you at the moment. So they are trading in shops that we see every day in the UK. They have about 45 years of service behind them in the beauty industry, and they manufacture more than 60 million products each year with distribution in more than 180 countries. They are classed as a house of brands. So they've got 43 different brands in total, 20,000 products, and And just to put that into context of a brand that you might know in the UK, that's or one that's we know more of in the UK, that's about half as many products as L'Oreal has. And they are sold exclusively through distributors and wholesalers. So if you go to the next slide. So AII wanted to make use of digital information, given the nature of their products. Their products are really quite small. You could see it was like nail polish bottles, it was like eyelash packages, and all of their packaging is very, very small, and there's only so much information they could fit on their pack. However, they needed to comply with legislations. Phil, if you just keep pressing, there should, one more. Yep, that's it. No, go back. We'll get there. That's it, thank you. So yeah, the space on pack is absolutely premium. You can see as that one example there, which is eyelash glue. They put a GS1 powered QR code on their product, so that when a consumer can scan that, they can comply with legislations. So the regulations they have focused on are those three on the left-hand side. Monica's gone over some of the detail of those already. They encompass reporting on the components of packaging, and also what a consumer needs to do with that packaging. There are different regulations depending on the country, just to make life even more difficult for you brands out there. There's different regulations in Italy as there are in France as to what they need to do with it. But there is a solution of a digital link, a QR code on the product, which can support AI and other brands out there with this. So far, they have got over 326 products live with a GS1 powered QR code. And at the moment, they're focusing on getting that QR code downloaded and onto more packs. And on the front facing app, when a consumer will scan it, it's just ensuring that all the different tiles that then the receiver can click on are full of information that they're wanting to share with them. It's a great example of control for this brand because they have control of the information which their wholesalers and distributors are getting, and they own that relationship of the information they're passing over to them. So they know that they are not only compliant with that legislation, but it also means that when their wholesalers and their distributors click on it, they're receiving the analytics from what information the consumers or their customers in this instance are wanting to get. Go to the next slide. So it is fairly early days for this brand. They've been doing it, I think, now for about 9 months, and they're waiting for more and more packs to go through the supply chain so that they can measure the effectiveness of it. But so far, the analytics of the scans seem to reflect in the aims that they had so far, which was to make sure that they could do bulk updates to the information that their wholesalers and distributors are seeing to make sure the information they have is up to date. They wanted to make sure that all of their data was in one place and they had control of that. They also wanted to make sure that they had structure behind the way the information was put across the distributors through the naming conventions which the GS1 standards provide. And they found that the tile, so it's like almost like a Uber Eats app is one way of describing it. And each of the different tiles has different pieces of information. The tile which got the most clicks was actually the recycling one, which showed AEI Beauty that their distributors and their wholesalers were mostly interested in recycling information. Next slide. So what next? Well, they're actually in a bit of a reactive position at the moment. So they have got GS1 powered QR codes up and running. But as more and more legislation comes in, they're able to react to be able to comply with it. So they have just started to implement Article 13 updates, which Monica has already touched on, which is the new regulation in France to disclose product attributes such as the presence and amount of recycled content, recyclability, hazardous substance, and traceability. If they don't comply with these regulations, I think it's fines up to £15,000 per SKU. So that's quite a large amount for an organisation. They are also trying to be more proactive. So they're trying to get more products live using GS1 powered QR codes, so they have more control over more of their product range. They're also testing the barcode positioning on their product to see where it's the most user-friendly and most effective. And they're also focusing, so at the moment they are focusing on legislation initially. That's their primary purpose for using GS1 powered QR codes, but they are looking to move to adding video content on there to showcase to their consumers and also some of the distributors how to actually use their products. So they'll do legislation first, and then they'll go on to marketing. Next slide, please. So this is another example of a brand that are using GS1 powered QR codes. So this is a little nifty tool which helps you to fix your glasses. And if like me, you wear glasses, it's very handy to have one of those in your pocket. So Snap It Screw operate in multiple different countries. And their main purpose for implementing GS1 powered QR codes was so that consumers, so the everyday consumer, you and I, not wholesalers and distributors, but more general consumers, could access the information they wanted to share in their own language. So it would mean that the information in there is accurate, but also due to geolocator, when it's scanned in Japan, China, or wherever, it can be translated and therefore can be specific to that customer. Just go to the next slide. So what they have done is, this is the back of pack. They've put this GS1 powered QR code with an instruction to the consumer just to start to try and change consumer behavior. We may have gone through the COVID period being used to scanning QR codes. However, a lot of customers, it's been proven, have got QR code fatigue. So there is a little bit in there around changing the consumer behavior, but it's been proven that not only by this brand, but also by multiple other brands, that when they just put a call to action for a consumer, they're starting to see that change of behavior already. So the consumer will scan that, and then they will get the how-to guides in their own language specific to them. This brand trade in, I think it's around 10 different countries around the world. So it does mean they haven't got to have individual, they haven't got to print off individual how-to guides for each individual country. The consumer simply has to scan it, and then they have it translated into their country of origin. Okay, next slide. Okay, I'm now going to pass over to Nikki, who's going to talk you through our GS1 powered QR code pilot program, and to see if any of the brands on this call would like to get involved.
Hi everyone, I'm Nikki, and as Sophie said, I am managing our GS1 powered QR codes pilot program. Next slide, please. So we are looking for brands to join, and it's free to join. It's a quick and easy setup. It's a 6-month duration that the pilot runs for, and it's commencing in July. As part of the pilot, you will get access to a platform, as I said, for no cost, which will give you a dynamic landing page for each of your products included in the pilot, the ability to generate unique GS1 QR compliant codes for your products, which will direct customers to your landing pages, and the ability to manage and update the links to your product information in the GS1 ecosystem seamlessly via any device. I'm going to drop in the chat the link for you to be able to put your details in to join the program, and I'll be in touch with further details. Phil, next slide. So the form just looks like this, and as I said, I'll drop something in the chat, and please get in touch if you are interested. Thank you. I'm going to hand back to Kerry now.
Thanks, Nikki. So, brief summary around the benefits of GS1 powered QR codes. Certainly, we know that this will be a really, really good way of enabling companies to comply with legislation across borders, certainly when messages need to be communicated within multiple languages even. And I think some really good examples that Monica has shared showing this in practice and what this is starting to shape up like across Europe. Furthermore, we know there are many other opportunities definitely within the sustainability space. So informing consumers, giving them more information, like I said, on how to effectively store that product to make it more sustainable, consume that product in a sustainable way or in a way that makes it last for longer, and then also dispose of that product's packaging in the most sustainable way, whether that is through domestic curbside sorting, or whether that is something else unique to that product. Outside of sustainability, we see many benefits around implementation of GS1 powered QR codes. So we know from a lot of the brands we're speaking to, this is absolutely huge in terms of enabling brands to speak directly to their consumers in a way that can help them drive revenue. So imagine using your headline products, your best sellers, to shout about innovation, to shout about rest of range, and to shout about promotions, brand stories, coupons, all of that sort of thing. And we know as well that everyone we speak to within the branded manufacturing space wants to do more within digital. They see, you know, the internet is something that's not going away. They see consumers, around 95% of consumers within the UK owning a smartphone and being on that smartphone for over 3 hours a day. So there is effectively an engaged, ready, primed audience that brands can tap directly into through their product packaging. And finally, we know from a lot of the brands that are engaging through our partner program, really interesting around collecting first-party consumer data. So understanding once consumers scan that QR code, what they're looking at. Sophie mentioned that sustainability was one of the most visited tiles, but what else consumers are looking at, what their dwell time is, what content they're consuming. And we're seeing a number of brands using this to do rapid A/B testing on some of their marketing collateral, as well as getting a better understanding of what their consumers are interested in. We've also seen examples of brands using this directly to survey consumers and ask them what they want, ask for their feedback in real time. So with that, I'm going to hand over to questions. Sophie, I believe you have a short list of questions for me that have come through from our audience. Oh, you're on mute, Sophie.
There we go. Right. It's not a short list, it's the full list of questions, and we have had quite a few. So I'll kick off with one that's come through live on the webinar chat. Okay, so the question is, how would these QR codes assist with the transition to DRS?
The transition to DRS within the UK, I imagine that is. So we see this as, and in the conversations that we're having with government, so DEFRA, Scotland, we were working closely with Circularity Scotland up until quite recently, and Welsh Government. We see this as being something that will help overall sustainability. So we appreciate that deposit return schemes, DRS, are one part of a really big UK-wide play within the sustainability space. You've also got things like extended producer responsibility, legislation that requires brands to declare exactly what is in their packaging, what percentage of recycled content, etc. So we see this as being a simple way that can benefit manufacturers and enable manufacturers to comply with what is essentially quite difficult legislation much more easily. So like I said, conversations go back to, okay, well, what are the complexities that things like deposit return schemes are going to add for my supply chains? What happens if I have multiple deposit return schemes that I need to comply with? One's in Norway, one's in France, one's in Germany, plus the ones that are, in the pipeline. So we see this as firstly, enabling brands to comply with multiple DRS, deposit return scheme systems around UK and wider Europe, using the same product as opposed to having to make many different versions of the same product, and also as a way of complying with the wider sustainability legislation that is coming along quite quickly into the UK market.
Thanks very much. Next question we have is, when will UK retailers begin to accept 2D barcodes, or is this happening already? Great
question. So there is, I guess, a timeline associated around that. So if I take it up to GS1 global initiative around this, we as a global federation see that most supermarket tills will be able to accept 2D barcodes by 2027, and that's globally. To support that, we are working with these scanning manufacturers and with printing manufacturers as well within the space. So we're speaking to Zebra, who does all of the scanners in Tesco, Honeywell, Data Logic, and they've got the technology, it's ready to go, and it has been ready to go for more than a decade now, because this already happens within healthcare, it's really common. We see, looking at the UK supermarkets, the majority of retailers have started on this already. There are a number of retailers such as Tesco and Waitrose whose till systems already do accept 2D barcodes. Waitrose certainly does this, or M&S certainly does this as well within their apparel range. What is needed next is, I guess, a mass rollout of this. So we're working with across our top 6 grocers looking at testing this within their own label range, because you can imagine retailers have got control over their own label. It's much easier for them to say, switch this barcode off and put this new one on. We know from consumer testing that consumers will adapt really quickly. They know where the barcode is, they know what they've got to do at till point, and we've seen, looking at other countries, that adaptation takes place quite quickly. And we know within the UK market, like I said, most of the hardware is already there to do this. But what we imagine within the branded world will be a phased rollout that happens over the next 10 years. Why 10 years, you're asking? Because we have lots of convenience stores, lots of independent stores that sit outside mainstream grocery retail, who will also have to update their point of sale systems over the next decade. So we imagine that both barcodes will coexist, certainly on the majority of products outside on label, and that this will enable those products to go beep at the convenience stores, that may be, I guess, lagging behind from a technology perspective, but then having the GS1 Power QR code means that brands can get started on all of this already. So driving revenue, consumer engagement, complying with legislation, etc.
Thank you, Carrie. I'm going to combine 2 questions together for the next one because they are fairly similar. So will the list of allergens on products at the moment move to the QR code, or will there always be a legal requirement to list those on the product? And this is combined with a question that is, will 2D barcodes become a legal requirement?
So great questions. Firstly, if I take allergens, for example, we imagine that there will be some legislation that is so important to have on product packaging, it will always stay on product packaging. If I take the example of someone with an allergen that has a product potentially in their backpack or being offered to by a friend, they may not have their smartphone right there and then to be able to check whether that product is safe or not safe. So we would imagine allergens will always stay on back of pack so that consumers can access that information right at the point of consumption. We imagine that, so at the moment, we know that the allergen information is getting smaller and smaller as people need to, or as manufacturers need to fit more information on product packaging. So we think this is an opportunity for brands to use their packaging to make sure that, you know, the most essential information can be read by all consumers, is easy to read by all consumers. And we imagine that, you know, things like nutritionals, which also need to be on packaging, it gives brands the opportunity to go into more depth on some of that information. I'm sitting here in my living room with a broken foot. I'd like to know how much calcium is in the products I'm eating, because the doctors have advised me to eat more of that. I can't get to the store to look at back of pack, and I'm struggling to find that information anywhere sort of on the internet. So wouldn't it be incredible if we could find more detailed nutritional information, as well as things like allergens for people who need that as well? And so for your second question around, will this be mandatory? We are seeing in countries across Europe that yes, it is becoming mandatory, because legislators are acknowledging that, firstly, yeah, they want information flowing through manufacturer to the consumer, but whether that's sustainability or you know, something similar. And two, there isn't enough room on product packaging. So that information's got to get to the consumers somehow. And some of Monica's examples have shown how definitely within the EU, legislators are becoming a lot more proactive in saying, okay, let's use a QR code. That makes more sense. We can make sure the information is served up to consumers in a font they can read, in a way they can read, with the knowledge that around 95% of the population, and this number is growing, does have a smartphone.
Thanks very much. So we have got a few other questions, some of which I think we've covered in the webinar so far. But if you have previously asked a question and we think that we've covered it, but it hasn't answered the question which you were specifically asking, please do get in contact with us and ask again, and we will get back to you directly. Just two more which we have come through. So where should I direct my barcode link?
That's an absolutely great question. So I've seen another question around apps. So firstly, it's important to say this isn't an app at all. It is simply customer scans it and they're taken to a space. So there's no reason for them to download an app. We know that people don't like apps. Certainly after 3 years of lockdown and having to download too many apps, I would argue. So it's really easy and simple in terms of customer experience. In terms of where do you direct customers to? So there are a number of options. We would always recommend for brands of a certain size that have their own capabilities within, I guess, their master data space and within their website, that the best place to direct their consumers to would be within their own website. So probably within a subdomain, they would be able to have a product catalog list where they would have products set up individually in a way that's similar to the user experience that we showed, that we've sort of proposed to industry and that which our partners are using. We also think that this is a really good way for brands to maintain complete control of the data that they or the data that they ingest from that. And then also any updates they need to be making. So let's say you were running a promotion, you had a tile on promotions and you wanted to switch that promotion over to something else, that would be completely within your control and your power to do so. We appreciate that not every brand has the capability to run this sort of through their own website, and that's where the GS1 partner program becomes really, really useful. So within all of the examples shared by Sophie and Monica around Biodoc, around Polytag, around the GS1 UK venture in this space, we would brands would be able to provide the content that is necessary, and that content would be hosted by a third party. So they would be in charge of the consumer interface, how the consumer sees this, and then any updates required by the brand. Again, you can check out sort of more information on our website, and there's a couple of slides that show exactly what the consumer experience would look like. But please do get in touch with our team and we can advise you on what solution would be the best for you.
Thanks, Kerry. And there is one last, hold on, we've had another question come through. Okay, so we have had a question. I'm not just going to ignore it. I'm going to answer it, but we may have to take it away and ask somebody else in our team. Does the application for scanning these symbols work in all countries? For example, if our product is exported to another country, do the customers have access to the product data by scanning the QR code?
And the answer is yes, absolutely. So again, if you imagine a basic website that you're, as a consumer, looking for through Google, I'll give an example that I usually use. So a restaurant's website, I go to Poland a lot. I look on Google, I find a restaurant I want to go to, I click on that website. Not only does, not only do I have, access to that information, whether I'm in the UK or in Poland, I also have access to that in the language that I speak. The language I speak dictated by what's set up in my mobile phone, and geographically where I am as well. So your phone will know what country you're in, what language you speak, and scanning the QR code simply takes you to the appropriate information. So we've seen a couple of our partners have got a really, really slick user interface whereby customer scans it and automatically they would see the appropriate symbols for that country, whether that's recycling symbols or whatever else. Generally it is recycling symbols, and they see the information in the language that they speak without having to do much else. So that, yeah, absolutely, it will do that.
Great, thanks very much, Kerry. I'm going to stop the questions there, but if one of the questions we did have was, how do I get started? We've gone through the options that you can do to get started, but if you want to discuss with us further, please get in contact. We can pass you on to one of our partner companies if they will be able to support you, or you can have a chat with Nikki regarding the pilot, or we can talk through some of the steps so that you can just implement this internally yourself. And just to reiterate, if you're a GS1 member, it isn't an additional product that you're buying from us. You can make this as part of your membership. So we look forward to talking to you further, but please do get in contact if you'd like to discuss this. And thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.